Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, we've got our drill press table build part 2. Well, I kind of expected that this would be a multi-part show, and I'm not disappointed about it. I'd rather give multi-parts and more information than to rush through and have somebody kind of hanging in the balance wondering whatever happened with this or with that. But when we left last week's show, we were just cutting out that circular 5-inch cutout so that the table could slide back further to the column. Now, truth be told, I did kind of hog it out a bit with the bandsaw, but the table itself is too wide to get the bandsaw to cut it. So I ended up kind of half finishing it off with the jigsaw, which is a tool you rarely see on this show, and then over to the oscillating drum sander to finish it off and get it all smoothed out and sand up to the lines. So let's head over to the drill press and have a look where we're going from this point, because this is where it gets a little iffy. Okay, so we can see here at the back how we've allowed the drill press to come back closer to the column, pushing it back a little further on our table. So what I want to do is I want to place a mark. I've kind of squared it up on the table as best I can because you're working blind, but I've placed it here so it's somewhat centered, and front to back it's where I want it to be. So we're just going to place a line across the front here, just like that, and then we can take this out of here. We'll just flip it over for now. And there is the line. This is our alignment line for the front of the table. So what we want to do now is we're going to take this over to the bench and we're going to remove our stock table and bring that over to the bench as well. Okay, so this line that we placed on here, we're going to take a measurement, and this is 1.25 inches. So this is just a rough line. It's not perfect at all. I'm going to erase it and draw a perfectly parallel line to the front edge at 1.25 inches in from the edge. And that now will denote the front edge of our stock drill press table. So we're just going to line this up here. And we now want to measure and get our table perfectly centered on this. So I'm going to mess around with that, getting it centered. And once you get the measurement for the center, we can do the same thing. Place some marks here on the sides to show us where to line this table up. Okay, and once you're aligned with your table, you're happy with the way it's positioned, you want to trace these 4 outside holes or openings. What we're going to do is this is going to be how we fasten our table to our new wooden drill press table. So we just want the outlines of these holes so that we know where to place our threaded inserts, because that's how we're going to attach this. So we now need to make some inserts for these holes. Because the holes are so wide, so extensive, there's no way for us to be able to get a jig knob in there to tighten down on our threaded rod when we want to connect the whole thing together. So I'm just sliding a piece of paper underneath, and we are going to trace here. And that will be our cutting pattern. So we're going to cut one for each one of these 4 holes out of the same thickness of material as our table is thick. So we're going to do that at the scroll saw. Let me get that done, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to mark for our threaded inserts. So in order to mark for our threaded inserts, I'm just placing a mark 1.5 inches in from each one of these holes. And that is where our threaded insert is going to be. So I'm going to drill, and here we can remove this table now. So I'm going to drill these holes for the threaded inserts and install them in the underside of the table. I'm going to be using 1/4 20 thread inserts, and as well in the corresponding pieces, we're going to want to place a mark coinciding with this hole for the insert, and we're going to want to drill an oversized hole in each one of these alignment blocks, we'll call them. Okay, so let me get these holes drilled for our threaded inserts. All right, and now we'll just get our threaded inserts put into the bottom of our table, just like this. All right, there's one. So we'll install the other 3, and then I guess we are ready to mount this to the actual table of our drill press. All we're going to need is some appropriately sized pieces of 1/4 20 threaded rod. Okay, so I have determined that a 2.5 inch length of threaded rod is sufficient to attach this table to my table. So I'm just going to thread the rod down through the holes that we made in our spacers until they bottom out. I also determined that a fender washer is enough to bridge the gap here. Now guys, you're going to want to check this with your own drill press. If it turns out that you have one of those drill presses where the gap down here at the bottom is bigger than the hole that's actually through the table, you're not going to need that fender washer. So we're just going to spin these 1/4 20 jig knobs on here, and this should sufficiently now hold my table in place. All right, so let's take this over to the drill press and we'll mount it and see how we're looking. Well guys, I am going to tell you that the combination of that iron table and that heavy plywood base, good grief, this thing weighs an absolute ton. Well, there's something a little interesting. The collar is getting in my way. Now that may not happen once the actual table is mounted in place, but for now, oh, it's going down, but there we go. Whew. Yeah, the only issue there, guys, is that doesn't look like, if I raise this up, that doesn't look like it's going to clear that collar. So I'm going to check that. I may have to enlarge that groove on the back or that indentation. But look at that. That is a sexy table for sure. Okay, we're not done. I'm out of breath. Good gosh, that's heavy. All right, so I'm going to check the clearance on our collar here because there may be instances where we want this to be higher. So I'm going to check that, and if so, or if need be, I'm going to enlarge this indentation that we cut. All right, so our table is mounted. I'm still not really happy with the amount of space I have between the choke ring here and that little indentation. I'm going to fix that after, but I just want to show you this. We have ourselves an issue. Well, we don't have an issue because I was expecting this. Now, guys, I'm going to show you how I'm going to overcome this. Some of you who have seen me do this to drill presses before are going to know exactly where I'm going with this. Others who have never seen me do it are going to have your new tool modification that you're going to say, oh my gosh, I have to do this tomorrow. And it's going to start off with this. I have two of these 45-degree gears. We're going to take off our original handle and place this gear in place. I'm going to put a key in here and then tighten it down onto the shaft. So with that gear mounted, where do we go from here? Well, I can tell you the first thing that I need is a second gear but I'm also going to need some steel rod. Well, before we can carry on with the rod, we need a measurement from the bottom of our wooden drill press table to the very center of this adjustment where we've installed this gear. You want to be as accurate as you can. So I found the best way to do this is just to place a square underneath your table, just like this, and you can use the top of the square as a reference and then get your measurement. So be as accurate as you can and get the measurement to the center of your adjustment spindle. Now, once you have your measurement from the bottom of your table to the center of your spindle, you're going to want to place your second gear just like this. Place it so that it meshes perfectly with your first gear. And we want a measurement from the outside edge of the table in to the center of that gear as well. Once you get those two measurements, we need a little bit of plywood. Well, what I have here is some plywood, 3/4 inch, the same material we've been using for the whole build. I have laminated it together so that it is double thickness, and using the dimensions that I got from measuring to the center of the spindle and the center of the second gear, I have drilled a 5/8 diameter hole. And once you get that hole drilled, this piece here is going to mount just like this on the underside of our table. And that hole is going to allow our steel rod to come through and connect to our gear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another piece of plywood just like this. We're going to duplicate these measurements and drill another 5/8 diameter hole. Then we're going to clamp this together. I'm going to show you what we're looking at that point in time. Well, I have the front face and the rear support glued in place, and I'm just going to slide a length of a 9/16 diameter rod through both holes and out the back. And we're going to attach our gear at the back and line it up, and then we can move to the front of our assembly and mark the length that we need to cut in order for this rod to work. Now, if your measurements are a little off, mine seem to be just a touch, don't worry about it. You can make the adjustments now before we glue these uprights in. So make sure that your gear is meshing perfectly, and once you're happy with that, then you can move on to the next step. And in order to measure for how much of this steel rod you need, we're going to place our original crank against our front surface board here, and we're just going to place a mark just outside of this. We're going to give a little bit of excess, maybe about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch excess. Well, I've cut my rod, and here's the problem. The thing is that no matter how much I tried, I couldn't get the proper size rod. The parts of the drill press of the Nova Voyager are metric. So I could not get the proper steel bar to be able to match the holes in this crank. So I have to trim this down about 1 millimeter in diameter all the way around. So it's a pretty barbaric way of doing it, but I'll show you what I'm going to do. So that I've marked where I need to start my trimming of this rod. And I'm just going to color with black magic marker here from that point all the way down to the bottom of the rod. I don't know if the camera is showing that, but we're going to color it black all the way around the circumference of our steel bar. And then once we get it fully colored, we're going to use my angle grinder. And taking light passes, we're going to start from the line of the depth of where we need our thinner rod to be, and we're going to make one pass down to the end of the rod with the angle grinder. From there, we're going to rotate it slightly and take another pass. We're going to keep going all the way around the rod until all the marker is gone. Then we're going to test the size and, if need be, repeat it until we get the proper size of rod that we need. Now guys, take light passes and please get a face shield on during this. All right, so it took 3 passes, and once we're happy with that fit, I'm going to grind a flat edge on this bar just to give the set pin here something to bite into when we actually put it in place. Well, the last 2 components of this part of the build are these 9/16 diameter stop collars, and they will be inserted onto this steel bar in between your back and your front supports, and that is what is going to keep your bar aligned from front to back. So I'm going to do this all as a dry fit, and we're going to test this operation before we move on. But guys, you want to make sure, get these front plates, the front plate and the back plate that supports that steel rod, get that very firmly in place, because once you start turning this to test its operation, the torque of those gears is going to want to pull that away from the table. So get it really clamped well in place and test it and make sure that you're happy with the operation. So at this point, I'm very happy with how smooth this is running. The crank in the front makes it so I don't have to get back in here and do this, and as well where my table was getting in the way anyway. This is a great modification. If you haven't done this on your drill press, you really got to think about this. All right, so either way, that's that done. Now guys, we're going to take this all apart now and take it over to the table saw. We're going to cut off these pieces trim. I want to trim off the corners of these supports so we don't have this sharp corner here to bang into and cause an injury. And as well, we're going to glue this together now. Guys, make sure that at this point, you want to get up underneath and place some marks under here so that you know where your piece is going to be to line it up. You don't want to be guessing at this point. You've already gone through all the trouble to set this up and to make sure that it's running smooth. Make sure that you have some kind of reference marks underneath so that you can, again, line it up once it's all glued together. Because once it's glued, you're kind of stuck with what you've got. Well, at this point, we're kind of at a standstill. We have our upright supports glued in place, and those 45s that I cut off of here, they make great, thick, sturdy gussets, guys. Don't forget, this upright wall that supports the steel rod is under a lot of stress. You're going to be jerking that around a lot as you're adjusting your table up and down. So give it as much support as you can. And these big, thick gussets here will go a long way to really securing that and keeping it in place. All we can do now is wait. I've driven a couple of 3-inch screws in through these 45s just to help hold everything in place. I will probably do the same thing with these gussets just for the same reason. A little extra support never ever hurts. Once this is all dried up, we're going to take it over to the drill press. We're going to do the final installation of our rod, our gear, our crank handle, and put the drill press back in place, and I'll show you what you're looking at. Okay, so the table is in place. All of our glue is dried. I've gone around, and any rough edges, I've sanded them off. This mechanism is super smooth. I absolutely love it, making it much easier to raise and lower the table when you put the gear mechanism at the back and bring your handle to the front. So there's only a couple more things left to do here. One of them is those gears at the back. We're going to add some grease to that to keep them running smoothly, and we can install our fence here on the table, but I just want to make an adjustable stop for our fence, and that's pretty simple to do. Well, making a fence stop for this is pretty simple. It's just an offcut of the plywood. I've made it just a little shy of what the fence is high, in this case 5 inches. I've drilled an oversized 5/16 diameter hole right here, centered on the width of our board, and the center of the hole coincides with the center of our T-track here, and it's just a T-bolt, a washer, and a jig knob, and that's it. that is your stop, rock solid. And for repeatable drilling procedures, it's fantastic. So honestly, you can't really go wrong with that. You may want to make sure that this is square. That way, when this stop sits, because you can raise it up or lower it down onto your table, but if you lower it flush to your table and tighten it in place, you now have a square reference to your table, as long as you've made sure that your stop block is square. So there you go, guys. I'm going to wrestle this behemoth back into place over here, and I think we can call this one done. And there you have it. A custom drill press table for the Nova Voyager DVR drill press. Now, guys, if this looks somewhat familiar to some of you who have been around for a while, it should, because it's pretty much a clone of the one that I made for the Rikon drill press. It's just a little bigger scale. It just had to be adjusted in certain ways because of the massive stock table that is with the Nova Voyager. Now, the crank is a lot bigger. The shaft is a lot bigger. Everything is bigger in this, and that caused me a couple of problems. One of the problems was that the rod that I had, the steel rod, I just couldn't get the size. I couldn't get the metric sizing that I needed, but we overcame that with the grinder, and that's an acceptable means of compromise, I guess, as long as you take your time and you're careful. Now, if you were running something that was, say, balanced and needed to be perfectly round, I wouldn't suggest doing what I did, but I had no way to turn it other than what I did. And it worked perfectly, so I'm not that concerned. With those gears, you want to keep an eye on the gears, guys, and give them a little bit of grease from time to time. And I know you guys are going to ask me, what kind of grease did you use? Just an all-purpose lithium grease. Does a great job. It stays on the gears. It really works in there and keeps them lubricated to prevent, as much as you can, that metal on metal grinding that will wear the gears down over time. All in all, guys, this project is a worthwhile one, and the most worthwhile part, and I can say that with the utmost certainty because I did it on the Rikon, and it has been the best tool modification I have done in this shop to date, moving that crank to the front of the drill press table. It is just a phenomenal addition to an already solid and heavy-duty drill press table to get that crank to the front. And I really don't know why drill press companies aren't moving it. It is so awkward to reach back there, and it's not like it's an uncommon thing to raise or lower your drill press table. It's a very common thing depending on the materials that you're working with. So why has it got to be so awkward for so many manufacturers? Why is it always at the back? It's such a simple thing to relocate it. Steel rods, some brackets, and a couple of gears. That's it. So why are we still reaching to the back of our drill press to adjust the height of the table? I don't know. But if you take nothing from this show, you got to take that away. You got to take that. And I'm telling you, no matter what the size of your drill press, relocate that crank. You're going to love me for it. Also, guys, the locking mechanism. A lot of guys always say to me, why don't you relocate that to the front? It's awkward. It's not as easy as the crank to relocate. Those gears need a lot of tension on them when you're tightening down the mechanism. I may look into it, I may not. But for now, I don't have a problem reaching back with my left hand and spinning that lock in place. Would I like it at the front? You know what? It wouldn't be a bad idea. And I may look into that for a future show. But for now, I'm going to leave it where it is because I don't really want to muck around too much more. This has already been 2 weeks of mucking around to get this done. And I don't mean just with the show. I mean, I've been out here for almost 5 days working on that drill press table. So that's 2 full weekends plus for me. So it's a time-consuming project. It's not a project that you would expect to bang off in a weekend by any means. So give yourself plenty of time. Take your time, do it right, and you'll be much happier with the results. Anyway, guys, that's it. That is the drill press table for the Nova Voyager. I love it. These things are awesome. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We have an amazing audience base, and I'm hoping that you're going to consider becoming a part of that. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's content. I hope you were able to take something positive away from the show. I hope you're going to give some of this a try for yourself. If you're still working off that little metal table, I hope you're going to expand that and work on a larger wooden one that's more suited to woodworking. I hope you're going to relocate that crank to the front end of your drill press. And more importantly, guys, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.